He bid 50 cents for a woman who hadn't spoken in 10 years. 3 months later, she sang. 50 cents. That's what I had left in my pocket after I sold the dun gelding, and that's what I put down on a debt-board auction outside the Drummond County Courthouse for a woman I'd never laid eyes on before that morning. I want to say I did it because it was the right thing. Mostly I did it because nobody else would, and the auctioneer kept saying her name like it was something stuck to his shoe, Tilda Vance, indentured for unpaid passage, no kin, no claim, going once, and not a man in that crowd would meet her eyes. She stood up on the wagon bed with her hands folded in front of her like she was already somewhere else, somewhere none of us could follow her to, and her dress had been let out twice at the seams by somebody who didn't care if it showed. I'd come to town for nails and a new file for the hay rake. I left with a woman and an empty pocket and the distinct sense that half the county thought I'd lost my mind. She didn't speak. Not on the wagon ride back, not when I showed her where she'd sleep. I gave her the room that used to be my mother's, kept the door latch on the inside so she'd know it was hers to use, not over the first supper, where she ate exactly 4 bites of stew and folded her hands again like she was waiting to be told to stop. Old Henriksen at the feed store told me later, when I went back for the nails I'd forgotten, that she hadn't spoken a word in 10 years. Not since whatever happened to her family on the crossing out from Missouri. A wagon train, a river, a fever, he wasn't sure which. The story had gone through enough mouths, by then it didn't much resemble itself. He said it like a warning, like I should have known better. I told him I didn't need her to talk. I needed somebody to mind the chickens while I worked the south fence, and a silent woman could mind chickens same as a loud one. That was a lie, or near enough to one. I was 46 years old, and I'd buried my mother and my brother both inside 3 winters, and the house had gotten so quiet I'd started talking to the dog just to hear a voice that wasn't the wind in the eaves. I didn't bid on her to save her. I bid because I was lonesome enough to take silence over nothing. First week, she wouldn't sit at the table with me. Took her plate out to the porch step and ate there, even when it rained, until I started bringing my own plate out and sitting a few feet off, not looking at her, just being another body in the evening air. Didn't say anything either. Figured if she'd had her fill of men talking at her, the least I could do was not be one more. She had a way of moving, like she was trying not to be noticed by the room. Flinched if I came around a corner too fast. I started whistling before I walked into any space she was in, the same 3 notes low, nothing fancy, so she'd know it was me and not have to brace for it. Took her 4 days to stop flinching at the whistle too. I counted. The chickens liked her. That was the first thing I noticed working in her favor. She'd stand out by the coop in the mornings with feed scattered in her apron, and they'd come right up around her boots, and she'd watch them the way you'd watch something you were trying to remember how to feel about. I'm not a man who talks easy. Never was. My pa used to say I had a mouth built for silence and hands built for work, and he didn't mean it kind, but he wasn't wrong either. So in a strange way, having her in the house didn't feel like living with absence. Felt more like living with somebody who understood the shape of it. 3 weeks in, I found her in the barn at first light, sitting on an overturned bucket with her hand flat against the neck of my horse, Daybreak, who is not an easy animal and has put more than one hired man on his backside. She had her forehead resting near his jaw and her shoulders weren't shaking exactly, but they weren't still either. I backed out before she saw me. Didn't mention it that night or any night after. Henriksen's wife came by that same week with a basket of preserves and a face fixed up like she was doing me a Christian service, and she asked Tilda straight out loud, the way you'd talk to someone you'd decided was simple, "And how are you finding the coal place, dear?" And Tilda went still as a fence post and looked at her own hands. I said the preserves looked fine and walked Mrs. Henriksen back to her buggy, a little faster than was polite. After she left, Tilda came and stood in the kitchen doorway. Didn't say anything. Just stood there a long minute, looking at me in a way I hadn't been looked at by anybody in longer than I wanted to count, and then she went and got the broom and started sweeping a floor that didn't need it. I understood that was as close to thank you as I was going to get, and it was enough. More than enough. Come the 2nd month, she started leaving things where I'd find them. A button sewn back onto my good shirt. The kitchen rearranged so the salt was where my hand expected it without me asking. A 2nd cup set out at breakfast before I'd even come down the stairs, like she'd started counting on me showing up. I'd had men work this ranch for me before, hard men, capable men, and not one of them ever thought to notice my shirt was missing a button. It wasn't a small thing to me. I want to be plain about that. It wasn't a small thing. There was a night in the 4th week, bad weather coming in off the ridge, wind tearing at the shutters, when a colt got loose from the lower pasture, and I went out after it in the dark with a lantern that kept guttering and a leg that's never set right since I broke it on the Brazos Drive 20 years back. Took me near 2 hours. Came back soaked to the bone, mud to the knee, and found every lamp in the house lit and her standing in the doorway with a blanket already in her hands, like she'd been standing there the whole while. She didn't say a word, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders herself, and her hands were shaking some, and I understood she'd been afraid for me, afraid in a way that meant something to her whether I came back or not. Nobody had stood in a doorway worried after me since my mother passed. I didn't sleep much that night. Lay there thinking that a woman who'd had every reason in the world to learn that men weren't worth waiting up for had stood in my doorway with a blanket anyway. 2nd month, somewhere past the middle of it, I started talking to her like she might answer. Not asking questions that needed words back, just talking, the way I used to talk to the dog, except now it had a different weight to it. Told her about my brother, how he died of a fever the same winter we lost the North herd to wolves, how I hadn't been able to say his name out loud to another living soul since. Told her things I hadn't told the preacher, hadn't told anybody. She listened with her whole body turned toward me. Never once looked away. It was somewhere in there I understood I'd stopped thinking of her as a debt I'd settled, and started thinking of her as someone I'd go a long way out of my way not to lose. 3rd month came in dry and hot, dust hanging over the fields like a held breath. I'd taken sick, nothing serious, a fever that wouldn't break, the kind that lays a man flat for a few days and makes him feel a fool for it, and she nursed me through it without ever once needing telling. Cool cloths, broth she must have started before I even knew I was bad off, sitting up by the bed reading me old letters my mother had kept, in a voice I'd never heard because she had to find it somewhere to do it. I remember coming up out of the fever, enough to understand the sound in the room was a voice. Hers, low, rough from disuse, reading my mother's handwriting back to me like she was learning the words new along with me. I didn't let on I'd heard it, didn't want to spook it back under wherever it had been living for 10 years. Just lay there and let it wash over me and thought, this is the finest thing that's happened to me in longer than I can recall, and I am not fool enough to ruin it by making a fuss. She kept doing it after that, reading out loud, at first only when she thought I was sleeping, then not minding so much if I was awake. Her voice came back the way water comes back to a creek bed after a long drought, not all at once, in fits, sinking back under for a day or two, and then rising again a little further each time. The first whole sentence she said to me direct, looking right at me, came on a Tuesday in late summer, out by the chicken coop, with feed scattered in her apron same as that first morning I'd seen her stand there. She said, "You whistle before you come round corners." I said I did. She said, "I know why now." That was all, but I had to go stand by the fence a minute after, because there are things a man my age has stopped expecting to feel, and that morning I felt every one of them at once. Word got round town, the way it does, that the silent woman from the coal place had found her voice. Some of them said it like a miracle, like I'd worked some trick. Henrikson's wife came by again, looking for a story to carry home, and Tilda came out onto the porch this time, stood right beside me, close enough I could feel the warmth off her, and said good afternoon plain as anything, and watched the woman's face change. She didn't owe that town an explanation, didn't give one. Just stood there next to me with her hand finding mine, not grabbing at it, just resting there like it belonged, and let them see what they saw. That's the part I keep coming back to when I think on it now, not the words, the standing beside me. 10 years a woman doesn't trust her own voice to a room, and she chooses to stand next to a plain, quiet, 46-year-old rancher with a bad leg and a worse temper some mornings, in front of the one woman in town most likely to carry tales. And she does it on purpose with her chin up, like I was worth being seen next to. Nobody had stood beside me like that. Not once in my life had anybody chosen to be seen standing next to me. We were married before the leaves turned, out by the same fence where the chickens used to come to her hand. Small thing. Henrikson stood up for me since I had no brother left to do it. She wore her mother's ring, which she still had, which she'd kept through all of it, through the river or the fever or whatever it was that took the rest of them, and never told me the particulars, and I never asked. Some things a man learns to let stay where they are. These days she sings while she works the kitchen, not loud, not for anybody but herself, low under her breath the way a person does when singing's become a thing they trust again. I hear it from the barn sometimes, working on the tack, and I stop what I'm doing and just stand there and listen, the way you'd stand still for a deer that's wandered close, not wanting to spook the good thing back into hiding. Last week she put her hand flat on my chest at the supper table, no reason for it, just did it, and looked at me a long moment the way she used to look at daybreak in the barn that first month, like she was memorizing something. I asked her what she was thinking. She said that I bid on a man too that day, same as you bid on me, just took longer for anybody to notice. I didn't have an answer for that. Just covered her hand with mine and let the kitchen go quiet around us, the good kind of quiet now, the kind two people build together instead of the kind that's left over when everybody else is gone.